Hi, everybody. Craig Muller here, Professional Services Director for RADWIN in North America. I'd certainly like to extend my gratitude for all of you joining today. We've got a very interesting presentation for you, and I hope that I can answer any questions at the end. Just go ahead and throw those in the question chat area, and let's begin, shall we? We all know who RADWIN is, I hope. And actually, if you don't, certainly we'd like an opportunity to tell you a little more in detail in a more intimate setting. We're the leading provider of broadband wireless solutions globally with 18 offices around the world, about 200 tier one partners in 170 different countries, which is pretty impressive, and over 1 million radios and counting globally installed. Can't go too far without talking about the COVID issues that we're facing on the planet. We are working as normal today. And our manufacturing facilities in both Singapore and Israel are working as usual in full work mode. You know, our distributors, best distributors in North America and globally, they saw what was coming. They're fully stocked, ready to fulfill orders today. We talk about fast growing traffic, right? And I looked at this presentation and I saw the date, right? 2019. I don't even know if any of that's relevant anymore, quite honestly, with the things that I've seen in the last couple of months. But let's go with what I have and we'll talk about that a little bit. IP video, the biggest driver. We've seen continuously how lesser built networks are swallowed whole by the demands of people cutting the cord, even before what's going on today in 2020. A 26% growth year over year. In 2019, 76% of the traffic generated was video on demand. And that's just going to continue to grow. And where is it growing? The fastest, obviously in places that can develop faster broadband services. And we're talking about the speed on average, 2019 to 2022. North America is certainly, per capita at the higher end, but there's still a lot of work to be done, right? Today is 70 meg and, and growing. 100 meg services is something we're doing today and have been doing for the last year, and that's always been a goal, and a hard to achieve one, right? To do that cohesively, in large numbers, but yet we're doing it, But why is that demand there today, right? The influx of fiber. I tell people, if you have dial-up service, you have dial-up toys. If you have DSL service, you have DSL toys. You have wireless broadband services, you get the toys for that. And if you have fiber toys, those are the ones that are really pushing a lot of bandwidth. But we're right in the middle there. High bandwidth applications, that are drawing video conferencing, for instance, video surveillance. The demand for video on demand that's never going to go away. And people say, well, but there's fiber. Where is the wireless opportunity? And quite honestly, it's at the edges of those networks primarily, the fiber to here and wireless to there. But the ROI on fiber isn't great. So it's never going to be a 100% solution. And so it's not available. The time to deploy, obviously, there's things that are being, roadblocks that are being pulled down to try to make this happen quicker. But I think the wireless opportunity is here to stay. I don't particularly care for the headline here, fill the gap of fiber, right? Because, a properly built wireless network does as good of a job and more for what's needed today. Not everybody needs fiber today. The near future, some of the competition that we see coming in, the 5G technologies, both the 3.5 and the millimeter wave, very sticky. 60 gigahertz, right? Unlicensed, which is really good for shorter distances in the urban, suburban, and in even metro opportunities when you're talking about commercial opportunities. And then CBRS, which is to me still a bit of unknown. There's still some mystery around who's going to get what, how it's going to perform, and we'll see where it goes. But for me today, 5 gigahertz is still the standard for broadband access. I can put more bandwidth in quicker than anybody else and be unencumbered by some of these pesky things like regulations, right? The pros, for the 5 gig, and for me this is probably the biggest one, is it gives me a lot of choices. One single radio gives me 4 different subbands, and some of our radios will give you the 4.9 if you require that for public safety. But it gives you options to move between different subbands, based on your need, based on challenges. It doesn't cost you anything. It's regulated worldwide. There's an ecosystem for it. Propagation insensitive to precipitation, say that 4 times. It doesn't really care about rain. It doesn't care so much about snow. It'll deal with all of that in a very, very realistic fashion. Can work in certain levels of near line of sight. A few trees, maybe a tree or two, maybe, depending on the tree, depending on the rest of the air interface, what that looks like. And then relatively good outdoor coverage, right? We've all probably deployed this, as our go-to, but we know that it has some drawbacks, right? The limitations, and as long as you stay, within the dotted lines, right, you'll be great. But we all want to take that step on the other side, and the other side is got some cons. Noisy spectrum, RF interference, whether it's yourself, the RF cowboy down the road, or my next door neighbor who had a minus 40 5.4 link blowing into my yard. Reduce that channel bandwidth. Limit the service capacity, right? Because you've got unsettled modulation levels and your reliability. The last thing you want is your radios to be dropping in and out and people starting to make phone calls. DFS in the 5.2, 5.4, FCC IC, and that's what I'll be talking about and referencing, right? But we do host and support, a whole host of global regulations. That's just what it is. It's something you have to work with, right? Is the DFS. So service interruptions upon DFS, but a well-planned network, you're not going to see that too often. And then I threw this one in. Trees are not your friend. I mean, in the 5 gig, you need line of sight. But what can you do about some of those things? I can't cut down all the trees, although if you looked in my yard, you'd be willing to take that bet that I had. And I can't get rid of all the interference, but how do I work around it? How do I make a better radio, get better performance as things even increase and get worse, right? Our solution is a base station with a beamforming solution, a solution that has dynamic channel bandwidth selection, a dual carrier base station with frequency diversity, and optimized selection for clear channels. Our base stations are beamforming. They are very accurate when they point to your home. And if they don't need to come and visit you to drop traffic off coming in from the network or pick traffic up coming from your house, they're not going to waste their time on you. They're going to take that time and spend it elsewhere. So when they give your time to somebody else when you don't need it, that person finishes their job quicker, so that the next idle time can be shared as well, and works very, very well. Getting more capacity from the 5 gig, and the duo automatic mechanisms are mechanisms that you know very well from the jet radio, from the 2000D plus, from the alpha point-to-point, dynamic channel bandwidth selection. You put in the maximum channel size that you can support, and I like to say 40 megahertz, and my radios will depending on how the air interface looks, with interference, packet error rate, retransmissions, and a little algorithm, the base station will decide what channel size to transmit to the subscriber unit, and it'll tell the subscriber unit what channel size to transmit back to the base station. That's great. Adaptive modulation, same thing. Base station decides bidirectionally what that modulation would be. And then we have auto MIMO diversity functionality, which again, the base is going to decide per direction whether I'm going to transmit in 2x2 MIMO or diversity mode. And the amazing part about this is it's happening to all the subscribers independently. So subscriber 1 could have a different scheme than subscriber 2 through 64. All right, and it's really remarkable to watch the adaptive mechanisms work in a highly interfered network. It looks like a European train station ticker from some old movie, just constantly changing, but you rarely see these radios resynchronize, and that's the real key. Maximum capacity per customer, these mechanisms can change twice a second, and they're hitless and seamless to the end user. And most importantly, you don't have to do anything as the operator. We're looking for that lossless link availability, and we work very, very hard to keep that. Again, looking at the pictures here, uplink and downlink, different channel sizes, bidirectionally per subscriber unit. How does the beamforming suppress interference, and what benefit does it provide? I'll fix that English later. RADWIN beamforming antenna suppresses the interference by 20 dB over your typical point to multi-point passive antenna solution. Okay, that is higher than the previous solution that we have with the single carrier jet, which is about 14 dB. The second generation on the Duo has improved by about a third, which is very, very impressive. And you can see here on this chart what I'm talking about. I'm not getting you any more gain, okay? I mean, we are one of the highest gain base stations in the industry, but I'm not changing that, right? All I'm doing is pushing that noise down, so I've got a much stronger carrier at my subscriber side than I do than your average link with a passive antenna situation. So what is dual carrier beamforming? I know some of you sitting on at least one of the Duo webinars recently. I just got my unit the other day, so if you weren't on the third webinar, you didn't get to see me like a new kid with a new toy. Dual radios in a single unit. Each radio transmits and receives a carrier of up to 750 meg. Uses different non-overlapping channels, okay, whether they're 20, 40, or 80 in the dynamic, or even a 10 megahertz is optional. They are running either in the same subband, so you could run 258 channels, okay, non-overlapping, or you could have a combination of 5.8 and 5.1. Narrow beam width on our beamforming, just like the single carrier of 8 degrees horizontal, and these are 90-degree sectors, okay? Hard 90 degrees, unlike passive technology with, it's 15 degrees of adjacent bleed over. We're more in the low single digits, 2-3 degrees, okay? Very, very tight. So planning is key. We support 2 separate customer groups. You could run commercial on one half, residential on the other, high-end residential on one half, lower-end residential on the other. It gives you options to segregate your 2 different types of customer traffic. 2 subscriber units will communicate simultaneously with the Jet Duo. One to the upper half, one to the lower half. 2 different independent carriers, okay, which keeps your situation quite straight. A unique feature that will be released at the end of Q2, in revision 1, we're gonna have frequency diversity. So I'm transmitting in 2 different carriers, F1 and F2, I don't really care or need to differentiate right now whether they're in the same subband or if they're 5.8 and 5.1, or if they're in the DFS bands that'll be released in the middle of the year. I got one subscriber on one subscriber on the other, okay? And if I see some interference for my subscriber unit on the right, dynamically this subscriber unit could switch to the alternate carrier, okay? And there'll be mechanisms in place to prioritize which subscribers you want to go. Maybe you don't want somebody to go, but it's going to have the customization that you're going to demand from this sort of functionality. But it is quite unique, and we're talking about middle of the year for this release. This is dynamic carrier selection. We're talking about load balancing, seamless DFS shifting. So if you were running in the 5.4 on one and the 5.1 on the other half, if you did take a DFS event that was unrecoverable, which would mean that your ACS list is being impacted across the board, your automatic channel selection list, you could shift dynamically to a non-DFS carrier in the same radio without you doing anything. Oh, again, we talked about the channel sizes that we support, but 80 megahertz is generally unrealistic in most places, in my coverage area anyway, in North America. If you do have the ability to run in 80 megahertz, by all means, go ahead. There's some limitations with frequency reuse, and the professional services team from your region would be very happy to discuss best practices when it comes to that. But the ability to split that in half and have some frequency agility, whether that's in the same subband, a lot of people run 40 megahertz in the lower part of the 5.8 band and another 40 in the upper part of the 5.8, right? And we do frequency reuse of two, back-to-back 180 degrees, 5 feet of separation, we can run the same exact channel. Having that ability to shift around when you see noise in one part of the band, being able to run adjacent channels is very, very important. This is a picture of the Duo. If you've seen, the single carrier jet, it's really 2 times the size, which is still very small. It's about the size of a medium pizza box. I'm sure some of us remember what that looks like at this point. And it's 3 inches thick, maybe at its widest point. This is the backside where you see the radio chassis attached to the Duo antenna. This can support 1.5 gig Ethernet capacity, 2 by 750 meg with 80 meg channels. Today, this radio will support 64 subs. It is hardware ready, and the middle of the year, we'll be releasing a new release of software that'll enable the 128 users. This is a pro radio, okay? It is committed information rate or best effort. And that residential enterprise thing is blurring these days. So I wouldn't, I don't really think about that too much anymore because utilization, is 24 hours a day from what I've seen. Second generation beamforming antenna, as I explained earlier. This is a 19 dBi gain antenna per carrier. Remember, there are 2 antenna systems in one chassis here. Each half is 19 dBi. The frequency reuse of 2 I just discussed. An SFP port has arrived on the RADWIN radios. 1 gig interface, full duplex to each one of these radios. PoE connectivity as well as an option. These are PoE powered radios. Again, frequency bands 5.8 and 5.1 today in the FCC, 5.8 in the IC, hardware ready for the 5.3 and 5.4 DFS bands in the middle of the year. So when we talk about frequency reuse too, what's so important about it, our narrow beam width, reduces the self-interference to a minimum. Again, that adjacent sector thing is huge, right? We don't interfere with ourselves with adjacent sectors. We have the interference suppression that we're doing from adjacent carriers. The entire base station is not receiving all of that external noise, only the beamforming postage stamp size antenna that's transmitting and receiving could be impacted, and that's how we're pushing all that down. Each channel can be used twice in every site within a network. So literally when we do our planning and our deployments, we try to only use 2 pairs for the overall network. Obviously, sometimes we run into some challenges, where we run into other people's interference, right? And then we just have the ability to shift. Again, Wi-Fi gigahertz is so great, I can just move to a different part of the spectrum, a different subband, where I don't have the interference and, get back to working efficiently. Large networks, literally this is how we do it. F1 and F2, shooting at F3 and F4. We want the opposite channels to be shooting at each other. We prefer that we don't have the same frequencies bathing subscriber units in the same channel, for obvious reasons. Now, that being said, the real world is not in right angles, and we do have that happen. And you may never even notice that it's happening, but there's definitely some negatives to doing that. You're losing something whether you realize it or not. The value proposition of this platform, I think, is very clear to me. Okay, this is 2 Jet Pro radios for a little bit more money than a single carrier jet. It's the 2nd generation beamforming. It's got a tremendously powerful new web GUI. It's really, I think, the future. You talk about scalability. That is how you survive today, is being able to scale your clients up. I know a lot of wireless ISPs, that were caught. I mean, who knew, right? Who knew that we were going to all be working from home? But those who built, a solid network that had some scalability in it, that didn't push the edges, right? Of the limitations of the technology, the limitations of the networks, they were prepared for this and they were able to absorb it. I don't think that anybody absorbed it 100% without having to do, maybe increase some backhaul link capacity, maybe add additional base stations to offload traffic and add more subscriber units. I think that every client that I talk to is running, installations at full capacity, full board today, trying to get people hooked up to satisfy people working from home, kids trying to get through school, including my own college student trying to graduate this year. And I don't believe it's going back to normal. Okay, I don't know what that is actually, but what the data usage was 6 months ago, that's gone forever. It's not maybe going to be 150% like it is today increase, but at least 50% of that's not going anywhere, in my estimation of 20 years of doing this. People have realized what they can do from home. Employers have realized what their employees can do from home, right? So I think we're looking at the new reality, which is continue to increase capacity, but we also have to look at stability as the key, to growing the infrastructure and growing our businesses. When we look at distance versus range, again, this is surface of the moon, right? No external noise, no trees, nothing like that. But 40 meg channel in the 5.8 with a downlink uplink ratio, right, of 80-20, which is very common in the industry. 80% is base station transmitting to the subscriber unit, bringing that video on demand into the home, and 20% of that pool of bandwidth is for the uplink. We've certainly seen, by the way, in our analysis at RADWIN, a massive increase percentage-wise, significantly higher than the downlink increase is the uplink increase, mostly because most people weren't doing a lot of uplink traffic to begin with, but when you add video conferencing, whether it's for business or for pleasure, and everybody and their brother has a video conferencing platform today, and everybody wants to use them all. But you're looking at high capacity, over longer distances, and a more stable system. And the Jet Duo, in summary, is the ultimate way to deliver broadband services over 5 gig, ultra high capacity, unparalleled service reliability, and I think a very impressive, mental roadmap of where this product is going to lead the industry. All right. I certainly thank you, and I'm going to take a look at some questions. Again, this is Craig Muller. I'm the Director of Professional Services in North America. My contact information is right there. It's Craig_M@radwin.com, a couple of different phone numbers. I prefer you call me on the Skype number if you do. I am a rural living person, and cellular just hasn't caught up with me. So again, I thank you very much, and let's take a look at some phone calls.